I'm rather Incoherent. Welcome back to my investigator discussion series. Today we're going to be talking about Norman Withers, one of the Edge of the Earth investigators. He may look like a Seeker, but he is actually a Mystic in a trench coat. He has the unique Edge of the Earth deck building rules, which is Seeker cards level 0 only, Mystic cards level 1 to 5, and then only up to 5 level 0 Mystic cards. And like all of the Edge of the Earth characters, this means that he's not really a Seeker or a Mystic. He's something in between, unique to him, just like everyone from Edge of the Earth, and you can't really judge him as either a Seeker or a Mystic, and he ends up playing a very unique deck that no one else can really play quite the same way. And it's not so much that Norman chooses to do this, as that Norman has to do this. And that's because without upgrading your Seeker cards, you really can't build into the traditional Seeker game plan in any capacity. And with only 5 level 0 Mystic cards, you can't really start the way a Mystic would like to either. So let's start going through Norman Withers' character card and figuring out what he's good at and what makes him uniquely powerful, and there's actually quite a lot to like. Let's start with the stat line. 4 in head, 5 in book, 2 in fist, and 1 in foot. The 1 in foot is obviously unfortunate. You never like to see 1 in a Mythos stat, but if you're gonna have 4 in the other one, that makes it an easier pill to swallow, so you're at least safe, relatively speaking, to half the Mythos stack. We only have 1 wasted stat point on this stat line in fist. That's way more efficient than most stat lines. And 5 in book means we'll be coming into scenario 1 with our level 0 Seeker cards swinging. As a stat line, it's really good. 5 in your do something stat, safe to half the Mythos, and frankly, across most campaigns, the more common half of the Mythos. And then you'll have to figure out what to do about this 1 foot, and you have plenty of fine answers to that, which we'll get into shortly. Norman Withers has a very interesting ability. He plays with the top card of his deck revealed, just know what it is at all times. And then once per round, you may play the top card of your deck as if it were in your hand at -1 resource cost. Now, in an absolutely ideal world, that means every turn you get to draw a card and gain a resource for free. Does it actually amount to that? No, of course not. If there is a skill on top of your deck, then you simply cannot make use of this ability. That doesn't happen with weaknesses though, because forced after a weakness is revealed on top of your deck, draw it. Which, to be clear, is just like Mr. Rook, it's not actually a problem. Sure, with Mr. Rook, you get to choose when your weakness hits you, and that's unfortunate that you don't get to choose with this, but Norman doesn't have to draw his weaknesses. For anyone else in the game, a weakness is harsher than it is on Norman, because while he draws it a turn earlier, he never loses a draw to add it to his hand. And his star is +X. You may swap the top card of your deck with a card in your hand. X is the resource cost of the top card of your deck. So that typically means that you can, if you were in one of those situations I was talking about previously, where you either have a skill on top of your deck, or for instance, a duplicate asset that you have no reason to play, you can swap it with something in your hand that you do want to play to get that value out of this. Is it a great star? No, but it is a good star. For a star to be truly great, it has to be something that's universally useful, where the star happens, and every single time it happens, it's going to give you a lot of value, and this is just fundamentally niche. There'll be times when you get a star after you've already used the top card of your deck. There'll be times when you get a star when there's no meaningful swap you can make. There'll be times when you get a star and you have no 1-cost cards available and 0 resources in your pool, and it doesn't matter what's on top of your deck because you'll never be able to play it. But a lot of the time you get this and it does impact piloting, and it allows you to make a different decision, and it makes your turn better. And of course he has a good split of soak with 7 in meat and 8 in brain. So with a frankly really good stat line and a very powerful ability, he's well poised to do something pretty powerful. We should, however, talk about his signatures. More specifically, his signature asset. His signature weakness isn't too bad. I can't remember how this book is pronounced, so I'm not going to try, but the Hyperborean Grimoire is a 2-cost hand asset, and as a lightning bolt, you can exhaust it to swap the top card of your deck with a card in your hand. And then as a lightning bolt, you can exhaust it and commit the top card of your deck to an eligible skill test performed by an investigator at your location. So if you want to play a card from your hand for cheaper, then you can exhaust this and put that card on top of your deck, and that will allow you to play it for cheaper and effectively just manipulate your ability in that way. Alternatively, if there's already a skill on top of your deck, this just allows you to commit the skill directly to what you're doing. This makes your ability much more flexible, much more useful. Even if you have this in a vacuum with no synergy pieces, it's still a good card, but we're gonna have to get into the synergy piece of Astronomical Atlas in a second, because it combos with that incredibly powerful to create an infinite loop, and those words should set off alarm bells in your head for the power level of that combo. But first, the Harbinger. I will mention this weakness because it's like a direct wrench into your plans as Norman, but also ultimately most of the text doesn't matter because double action discard the Harbinger. What this says is that when this is on top of your deck, you do not draw it. You cannot draw or manipulate your deck in any way while it's on top of your deck, and it's a double action to get rid of it. So essentially, when you get this, Norman will have to pretty immediately just lose 2 actions. That's fine. Like, there are so much harsher weaknesses in the game than this. It's worth noting because it directly interacts with so much Norman does, and it is not just like nothing, but it hardly affects the power level of Norman. But before I go into the specific deck list, I need to talk about Astronomical Atlas, the Mystic 3 experience 3 cost asset that goes into your other hand slot. As a lightning bolt, you can exhaust Astronomical Atlas and look at the top card of your deck. As Norman, you already know what it is. If it's not a weakness, attach it face down to Astronomical Atlas, max 5 cards attached. So first, this just allows you to start digging through your deck much faster. You see the card on top of your deck, you don't want to deal with it as Norman, it has no value to you right now, slam it under the Atlas, see what the next one is, maybe that one will get you value. But more importantly, Lightning Bolt, commit a card attached to Astronomical Atlas to an eligible skill test. If it succeeds, add that card to your hand instead of discarding it, limit once per test. So let's say that you see a deduction on top of your deck. You can put it underneath Astronomical Atlas and then use it from the Astronomical Atlas. Notably, this first part exhausts, but the second part doesn't. So while you can only add one card to it, you can use as many cards as you want per round, and more importantly, you can use the card that you put under it the round you put it under the Atlas. And most importantly, after you do that, after you take the deduction off the top of your deck and put it under the Atlas and use it, it goes back to your hand, which, coming back to our signature asset, we can then use this ability to put it back on top of our deck the next turn and cycle this deduction every single turn. So while we will essentially stop getting our bonus draw from being Norman, we will absolutely benefit pretty tremendously from getting a deduction every turn. Once we have some combo pieces in play, which will take a hot second, it's not just instantly happening, but once we have those combo pieces in play, we very much are just playing a Rex knockoff. And Rex doesn't have 5 book, Rex doesn't commit a deduction, Rex needs to pass by 2 and we're up 2 book on the check compared to him. So Norman is notably better once set up with this book and the Astronomical Atlas, because that is an incredibly powerful thing that is very core to Norman. Now, moving on to the other stuff that you might want to play in Norman, one of his big cards, I would always call it like a pseudo signature for him, is Foresight. Fast, play when an investigator at your location would draw a card from their deck or from the encounter deck. It's a 0 cost, 1 experience event, so almost no cost to put this in your deck. Name a card. If the drawn card is named, that investigator may either cancel the card's effect and discard it, that would be for Mythos negation, or immediately play that card at -2 cost. So as Norman, let's say you see a Milan on top of your deck and you can't afford to play him that turn. Come the draw phase, before you draw it, you can use Foresight and say, hey, I think I'm about to draw Milan. Having gained money in the upkeep phase and reducing the cost of it by 2, unless you had literally 0 resources, you just play the Milan now for free immediately. This is really, really good. It is so much better than emergency cash because the fast play action is worth far more than 1 resource, and that's basically always going to be usable in Norman. You will always see the cards entering your hand before they do. Foresight is so valuable in this character. Beyond those 2 cards, Astronomical Atlas and Foresight, the question with Norman is just, what is the most powerful collection of things I can do? Should I be playing Clover? Should I be playing Flex? Playing Fighter is a pretty hard thing to ask of him when he only gets 5 level 0 Mystic cards, and his main class is Seeker. He's not really ever going to be a fighter. I will mention that St. Hubert's Key is a very cool card in Norman. It helps to bridge the gap between your 2 builds. It gives you both +1 head and book, and effectively +2 sanity with a bunch of extra steps. And while yes, obviously 4 cost play action is a lot worse than a magnifying glass, you do care about the head, and more importantly, as we covered earlier, your hand slots are kind of filled already. You're gonna have a hard time running magnifying glass for any period of time because your first 6 experience are gonna be opening up a really powerful broken combo for you. And again, it's worth noting that this is just a good card in Norman. If you miss the other book, you're doing great. Not that you will, because you can run Research Librarians and guarantee that you find the books you need. Beyond that, since it looks like the basic thing Norman wants to do is just, investigate with book, that's how he's gonna get his clues, whether he's Clover or Flex. Milan's an incredible ally. You got the normal suite of Burning the Midnight Oil, Deep Knowledge, and Practice makes perfect, with Deduction and other practice skills to just have comically powerful throughput, whether it's economy, draw, even team support to some degree with Deep Knowledge, or just finding more clues. The rest of our practice suite is Perception, because of course it is, and Promise of Power being one of the best Mythos cards in the game. Grasping Hands is a lot less scary, testing at 5 than 1, for instance. But realistically, if you have access to purple, you pretty much always just lose 2 card slots in your deck to Promise of Power. That's how the game works. And it's unfortunate, it makes the deck building less fun for me, but at the same time, I'm never upset when I'm playing the game that Promise of Power is in my hand. For me, I find the best way to play Norman is as a flex, where you use your 5 book from Mystic to just really easily handle the clue side of your job, and then use Branded Gathaga and Shriveling as your tools for dealing with enemies. Between Norman's Inherent draw plus the Deep Knowledge, you'll have no problem finding these tools. For a flex character, this is actually a ton of fighting, and even though there's only 4 cards in the deck that do fight, we actually have a pretty reliable way of finding them. Typically speaking, Norman's not one of those flex characters where the game starts and you trust them to be able to do everything and go up on their own. Norman's going to require a little bit of babysitting at the start of a lot of scenarios before he finds Branded Kathaga and Shriveling. Notably, in scenario 1, he will be a much worse fighter because these get plus head as you level them up. So when you're at base 4 head, 5 with Hubertski, you're a lot worse. So while Norman's not a great fighter early in the campaign, and very often he'll have to spend a turn or two finding a weapon, once he is later in the campaign and once he has found those items, he is incredibly self-sufficient. He can just go off on his own, easily deal with any enemy, easily clear any location. Norman is a character where he's not truly self-sufficient like what I view as some of the best flex characters in the game, but he doesn't need to be, because once someone has babysat him and given him what he needs to get going, he is so powerful and so self-sufficient then that it was worth the time. So often the case is that when you're making your own deck, the 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th best card in your deck for making you do your job better are actually less valuable than maybe the top 5 support cards could be. Deep Knowledge is an example of this. Very frequently, Seekers will find themselves playing Deep Knowledge on their teammates because sure, it will help you get a little bit more proactive value yourself, but your fighter's sitting over there with a machete in scenario 5 wondering where his runic axe is, and this is more valuable for them than you. Shortcut's a great example of that. Unfortunately, it's not a card I felt I could fit in the final deck list here, where again, Shortcut is always good for you, but for a Seeker, it's a maximum of +1 action. When you use it on somebody else, it allows you to move them outside of their turn, which is not something the game typically allows you to do, and the essentially rules-breaking nature of that interaction allows you to do a ton of things that are much more valuable than they normally might be. You shortcut someone else into a boss room before they spend any actions, and it allows them to essentially fight a boss with more actions than the game expects them to have. You shortcut somebody who has a monster engaged with them, and it allows you to move the monster out of a room that would have otherwise made it more threatening. You shortcut somebody who's got bad mobility and you have to run out of an asylum really quickly or else something bad happens. There are so many uses for shortcut on your team where it's actually more valuable than using it on you, and obviously Ward of Protection is a great example of this. It doesn't help you do your job proactively at all. It's because supporting your team is more valuable than the last proactive card you could use to push yourself further. And the reason I mention that so much is because Norman is an example of that. Norman's not asking you for your Crack the Case or your Faustian Bargain or your Deep Knowledge. He's asking you to spend actions making sure he is able to play the rest of the game the way he wants to. Maybe if he breaks horribly, he might ask for draw or economy, but most of the time, he will just be asking like, hey, I haven't found my weapon yet. The fighter's gonna have to struggle a little bit until I do. Or hey, all I found is weapons. I don't have any clue finding ability. I mean, I've got 5 book, but like, no one's that impressed when I clear out the 3-shroud location. That's not really what you need me for. It's a little bit helpful. I'm not gonna be as useful on the clue finding side for a little bit. The point is that if you give the Norman the support, if you give him the babysitting he will sometimes need in the first 3 or 4 turns, he will be incredibly powerful. And to reiterate why he's so powerful, 5 book, 6/7 with Milan and Hubertski, deduction committed to every clue finding check, 4 head, 5 with St. Hubertski, and then Shriveling attacking at 8 or Branded Kathaga at 7 for 3 damage each. The raw output of what this character is doing proactively, being able to commit deduction to every check at incredible Seeker numbers, or just dealing very good damage with arcane assets from from Mystic, he's very, very good. He has so many just generically powerful things available. I can't even talk. He has so many just generically good, powerful things available to him that fit together really well to create this sort of very unique Seeker Mystic Flex hybrid character that no one else really gets to play, certainly not at the same level that he does. I will mention one card that's not in this deck that Norman's uniquely good at using, which is the Summon Servitor. In my Luke video, I really should have mentioned Testing Sprint for similar reasons. Summon Servitor's problem is typically that base 4 book doesn't get through a lot of locations very quickly. I'll bring up the card. Summon Servitor is the customizable Mystic Arcane Asset Ally slot thing. When you first get it, all it does is it kills one of your assets when you put it into play, and then it can move around. It's useless. However, one of the more powerful things you can do with it is pick up Eyes of Flame, where it investigates with the base 4 book, and then it sort of becomes an event where you throw it down on a location and it slowly clears it out. Base 4 book's not allowed to get through many locations, but with stuff like St. Hubert's Key and a magnifying glass and Milan, you can get that to 6, 7, 8. You can get it to numbers where it will eventually full clear a location. My mobility on this character is not great. Wings of Night, if he's sticking with you, can give you pseudo Pathfinder. It doesn't tend to work as well as Pathfinder would. It has a lot of issues, but it is pseudo Pathfinder. It does give value. You can reduce the slot cost. You can reduce the discard requirement, or sorry, that's the wrong one I clicked. You can reduce the discard requirement to a recursion requirement, which is much, much better. You can use it as soak when your health soak is not incredible in this character. There's a lot of value on this, but the biggest thing that's unique to Norman is his ability to boost his book really meaningfully and then drop this down on a location with the expectation that it will clear it, or that it's just valuable mobility. And ultimately, I found that when I was trying to fit this in my decks, I did not like the way the economy lined up. I didn't like having to play this extra asset for 2 costs. I didn't like the cuts I had to make for it, but it is very powerful and it deserves to be mentioned. Which brings us to the level 0 deck. You only get 5 purple cards, and what are the 5 purple cards that make it into my final deck? Well, there are only 4 level 0 ones, Promise of Power and St. Hubert's Key, but that makes fighting really complicated because that leaves room for 1 Shriveling. So you're sort of, or at least I feel, sort of locked into using In the Thick of It for Brandigathuga, otherwise I'm not going to be able to fight that effectively. I'm still only running 3 assets, I need more than that, which is why Occult Lexicon is guest starring as the 2nd Shriveling. It's not even clearly worse than Shriveling, I would say, especially at this point in the game where you only have 4 head. So avoiding the test on Shriveling is actually pretty valuable, and I'd argue Occult Lexicon might even be better than the 2nd Shriveling. As for the rest of it, we're missing some of that purple juice that we use later on. We don't have things like Ghastly Possession to refuel these assets, and we don't have Astronomical Atlas, which gives us room for things like Magnifying Glass and Transmogrify. Again, we aren't that great at dealing with enemies, and Transmogrify is actually a pretty damn good way of doing it. It's a 1-cost evade check using our base 5 book, which we're great at boosting with Milan, Hubert's Key. And essentially, it just kills an enemy. Like, it doesn't actually kill an enemy, but it gets you a clue when you evade it, so there's almost no opportunity cost to doing this, and the enemy gains massive cannot move, so it will no longer engage with you, no longer move with you, no longer get dragged around with you. And this is a way of dealing with enemies. If you have a rogue on your team who can proceed to dodge it after you, this obviously has more value, rather. But the main thing is this is just additional enemy management at a point in time when the deck's not as good at doing it because it doesn't have Astronomical Atlas to churn through our deck faster and find the management tools. And Transmogrify is absolutely dealer's choice. There are a lot of different ways that you can run a final card in this list to help you deal with enemies. In the past, I might have run I've Got a Plan. Frankly, I don't think that's really worth doing in Norman, and I do want to put the emphasis on worth. Your deck's pretty expensive. I've Got a Plan costs 3 and St. Hubert's Key costs 4. If you do not hit early Milan, you're gonna have a hard time paying for everything you want in this deck if you start running stuff like I've Got a Plan. So Transmogrify being one of the cheapest ways to enemy manage is actually a pretty important part of why I picked it. But additionally, because the main weakness of Norman, in my opinion at least, is that he might often need babysitting before he finds all his pieces to become self-sufficient, I'd rather run something where I'm immediately valuable if it's in my hand than something where I'm more valuable later in the scenario because of the clue requirement on I've Got a Plan. That's what makes Transmogrify more appealing to me for my level 0 deck, at least until I have some more powerful things in the later version. And there's a very real argument that you could just keep Transmogrify forever and never upgrade into Ghastly Possession, which is essentially my later game fighting card, because it's the exact same argument, right? Ghastly Possession is, in my opinion, a much better way of fighting because it's me refilling Shrivelings and brands and giving me a ton of value. But at the same time, I don't need to upgrade that. It's a very low priority upgrade, and as always, we should talk about what the priority upgrades are. Now, earlier I was talking about Occult Lexicon not being an immediately obvious upgrade because, like, it's technically better than Shriveling, but that's actually a trap, and you're going to find out why when we come back to the higher level deck. What is our priority upgrade? What's the most important thing? It's Astronomical Atlas. It's so powerful for clue finding ability. So if we're immediately getting the Astronomical Atlas, to the point that in my starting deck, I actually just got the brands and did not get Foresight, which is an incredible one experience to spend to ensure that I can get these Astronomical Atlases in my first upgrade. If I'm getting this immediately and then finding the other book, because I have Research Librarians, then I really can't play Occult Lexicon very effectively. So my first priority upgrade is Astronomical Atlas. That's going to be 6 experience. And then, after that, I actually need Charisma, because if I draw an opening hand Milan, I can't play it until I've got my books, because I need to be able to play this Research Librarian. So I need to spend that 9th experience getting the Charisma to sort out draw order for Milan and Research Librarian. And you can absolutely be greedy and cut the 2nd Atlas in exchange for relying more heavily on Research Librarian. The reason I don't do that is because you need to find 2 books. You can't just settle for finding 1, so increasing the odds you find one of the 3 books before you play a research librarian is just really valuable. So the first 9 experience are the atlases and the charisma to make sure you can find all the books you're going to need. After that, you really want to cut one of your occult lexicons because it no longer fits in your occupied hand slots, and get a second shriveling at a baseline upgrade level. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if you buy it at 2 or is it 4 or 5. It's 5, but it matters that you get an upgraded one so that you can actually put it into play. After that, what's important to the deck? Well, if your team's weak to Mythos phase, Ward of Protection is always a priority. Foresight's incredible value. Ghastly Possession is the closest thing to a Bells and Whistle upgrade in this deck. You could keep Transmogrify all the way to an end of the campaign. It's really low priority. I would almost never get this before like 30 experience. Typically, I would focus on upgrading my weapons over picking up Ward of Protection. It's very selfish, I know, but I have a crippling footness. Oh, my head's not doing well. I have a crippling weakness to foot treacheries. So upgrading Ward to level 2 spends 2 experience because I am not able to get the permanent cards, right? This is actually 35 experience. I am not a mystic. I am Norman Withers. I'm something different. I could not get those permanent assets. This is 4 experience. It's a substantial diversion compared to what other mystics are spending on it. And then, because I am cripplingly weak to foot treacheries, when I use it on someone else, I'm losing a card in my hand, I'm losing a resource, I'm taking a horror, and I'm eventually gonna draw the foot treachery that cripples me. So I'm not actually giving a ton of team support with Ward of Protection, at least not for free. It's a really big opportunity cost to give your level 0 ward to someone else by spending experience on it, no less. So while normally Ward 2 immediately super important, because Norman's so scared of a certain card type and his experience is so tight compared to other mystics, this actually comes in a lot later for Norman than you might otherwise expect, and I do think the weapon upgrades are key after Astronomical Atlas. Of course, you'll pick up Foresight pretty much as soon as it fits your experience. Let's say you get in scenario 1, 7 experience. That's gonna be 2 Astronomical Atlases and 2 Foresights. I know that's 8, but I banked one in the thick of it, you'll remember. So that's the gist. It's really important that you get this stuff on the left. Filling out with Foresight's great, Ghastly Possession is Bells and Whistles, and bizarrely, upgrading Ward in this deck is a Bells and Whistles type of upgrade because of your own weakness and your own priorities and your lack of mystic experience permanence. Coming over to the tier list, Norman is between Trish and Men, and those are both characters I value really highly. I think I might be higher on Men than most for some reason. I'm not entirely sure what it is. I think I just really value the tempo and the card pool. But Norman is not easy to compare to other investigators, so his specific position in A tier is not something I'm super tied down to, because the jankier you are, the harder it is to put your specific position on a tier list. If you're simple, it's easy to compare you to other people. Norman is very strong with very unique weaknesses and very unique strengths, and I think on average, I can't say he's really much better than Kluber Trish. Kluber Trish is insanely powerful. The people above Norman in A tier, I mean, honestly, even Norman to some degree, but mostly starting at Trish, I would say everyone above Norman is really arguing they should be in S tier. Norman Withers is an absolutely incredible investigator, and the fact that he's halfway through my A tier and there's over a dozen characters above him is not a criticism of Norman. It is just those characters being absolutely ridiculous. And I'll go ahead and mention, this is hype. This is probably not real, but I used to have Father Mateo around here on the tier list. I finally took some time to look at Parallel Mateo, and like you just play Parallel front, vanilla back, right? And he skyrockets up the tier list. And the reason for this, I'll get into it a little bit here, because like, I don't want to make a Father Mateo video until I've managed to playtest his standalone with the new Parallel front. His new Parallel front essentially is Favor of the Sun every turn for free. He used to basically not have an ability, dude. The whole reason he managed to get into C tier was basically that Favor of the Sun with Rite of Seeking level 5 was one of the craziest things in the game, where you just automatically passed a 3-clue check 6 times a scenario, maximum. Now Father Mateo gets to do that every turn without even with no experience, no cards. He just gets to Favor of the Sun whenever he wants. That's absolutely crazy. I genuinely think Father Mateo is going to end up in my A tier as Parallel Father Mateo. I don't know that he's gonna end up this high, but a lot of the things that got Kate this high also get Mateo this high. I'll talk more about Kate in a future video, maybe tomorrow. But for now, back to Norman. I just needed to address that Father Mateo jumped up 30 spots on the tier list since last video. Talking about Norman, there is nothing that is holding him down. Everyone above him is just accelerated to the moon by something crazy, like I was talking about with Father Mateo just now, getting to use Favor the Sun Ancient Covenant every single turn with no opportunity cost. Norman Withers is incredibly strong. He's monstrously powerful proactively, his defenses are not bad, he has very unique play patterns, and there's really not a criticism of the character I have to levy. That's what starts happening when characters get into the strong tier and even the upper end of B tier. I don't have a complaint about Norman Withers. I just can't argue him any higher on the tier list than this. He's very, very, very good. Anyway, I really have nothing else to say on the old man, so I'll wrap it up here. I've been rather Incoherent. Thank you for your time. If you made it this far, then you know the YouTube algorithm drill. You've heard it a million times before. But before I go, a massive thank you to my patrons over on Patreon and my channel members here on YouTube. Thank you for your ongoing support, and I'll see all of you in the next one.